Hey, I'm Colin, and this is my January wrap-up. So I put too many books on my January TBR, but I actually ended up reading quite a few. I think I have 9 on this list of books I completed, and I had 2 did not finishes, which I will talk about at the end. I read some really great stuff in January. I also got in a couple book slumps, but I managed okay. So let's start with classics. The first classic that I read in January was The Wide Sargasso Sea by Rhys. And I was excited to read this, and this book completely threw me for a loop. So if you're unfamiliar with what this book's about, it is a retelling of Jane Eyre in a way. We follow Rochester's first wife, who in this is named Antoinette, not Bertha, through her childhood and her young adulthood and the beginning of her marriage to Rochester. This book is very beautifully written. It is not a very linear book, though. If you are looking for something that's very plot heavy and easy to follow, I wouldn't recommend this. I think this is more of an intermediate classic. It's not Finnegan's Wake, but it's also not an easy book to pick up and read. I think that Rhys can describe place so well. So this takes place almost the entire book in Jamaica and surrounding islands in the Caribbean. And she does such a good job making you feel like you're there. Obviously, I read this in January. I just read it one day. I sat down and read it. We were having a blizzard, and I put a fire in the fireplace, put a chair right next to it, propped my feet up, and read this straight through. I really enjoyed it. Our main character, Antoinette, is an interesting person because she's a white child and then woman living in Jamaica after slavery has been abolished, and she's the child of a former slave owner, and she feels like she doesn't belong anywhere. She's not European, but she's also not Jamaican, so she's kind of like a woman without a place, and that definitely carries throughout the story. I went into this, and this is a slight spoiler in terms of what the book is about. I went into this thinking that Rochester was kind of gaslighting her to believe that she was insane, but it's not really like that. She does slowly lose her mind in this book, which is very interesting to read. I gave this 4.25 stars. I really liked it. It was a great classic to start off my classics in 2022. And pick it up. Quick read, fun read for a nice, cozy afternoon. So the next classic I read was Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. And if you've been following my videos, you know that I actually started this in October on the 29th and read a bit. But then in November, I did NaNoWriMo, so I didn't really read much in November, so I put it down. In December, I only read a chapter or 2, so I finished this. And this was my last of Jane Austen's 6 major novels to finish. I went into this not thinking it would be my favorite because of all the film adaptations that I've seen. Northanger Abbey, it's not my least favorite, but it's definitely on the bottom half. I still think it's very fun and charming. It just doesn't hold a place in my heart as some of the other ones do. So when I started this, I thought the beginning was fantastic. It was so funny. The characters were so good. I love Catherine Morland. If you listen to the podcast Heaving Bosoms, which I love, they talk a lot about characters that are hot dummies, and Catherine Morland is such a hot dummy. She's beautiful and she's this wide-eyed innocent, but she also really doesn't have any idea what's going on. And I love the character of John Thorpe so much because in the movie he's annoying, but it's so much better in this book. Then the middle got a little slow for me. I felt like some of the relationships were just very redundant, Catherine's friendship with Isabella and how she kept having missed connections with Mr. Tilney, and it got a little slow, and I was okay, I know this is my mom's least favorite Jane Austen, and I was okay, well now I know why this is my mom's least favorite. But then I really did like the ending. I thought the ending picked back up and it was interesting, and I did like how this one ends differently than the others. The others all end with a quick wedding kind of, and this one doesn't. This is but then they had to wait and they had to wait and they had to wait, which I did like that. I would give this one 4 stars. I do like it. It is in my bottom half of Jane Austen rankings, but it's not last. And I'll do a Jane Austen rankings video probably in February or March to let you know my feelings on all of them. So that's Northanger Abbey last official Jane Austen read for me. I can still read Lady Susan. And the last classic I read in January was The Winter's Tale by William Shakespeare. There's my complete Shakespeare. This play was so good. So what I did is I both listened to and read it. I found an amazing production of it by, I think it's called BBC Shakespeare Sessions. I will put a link to it in the description. That is so well acted out. It was one of the best audios I've ever listened to. So basically what I would do is I would fold my laundry and listen to it. And then once I finished folding my laundry, I would sit and read along. And I did that 5 days in a row with the 5 acts. And it was wonderful. I looked forward to doing my laundry every day, which has never happened. And I loved it so much I am going to do a video completely about the play. It's so good. It's so good. If you're not familiar, it's kind of a strange play because the first 3 acts are super tragedy. Like you could end the play at the end of the 3rd act and it feels totally aligned with like Macbeth, King Lear, Othello, Romeo and Juliet, like dismal ending. But then you get 2 more acts that are in the future that it ends happily, and I loved it. There was only one scene that I had to pick my daughter up from ballet, and I didn't want to stop listening to it because the 4th act was really long. So I was listening to it while I was driving, and I wouldn't recommend doing that because it got a little confusing because it was like a party scene and there were a ton of characters talking. That was the only part that I thought the audio was a little bit harder than actually just reading the play. But definite 5-star read. This is immediately one of my favorite Shakespeare plays, which is awesome. Okay, so next let's talk about the fantasy that I read in January. First, I read Sistersong by Lucy Holland, and this was my most anticipated read for January, and it did not disappoint. Oh my gosh. Okay, so the plot of this book is that there are 3 children of a king in Dumnonia, which is post-Roman Britain, and the king doesn't have a traditional son. So we have 3 narrators who are the children of the king. Cain, Riva, and Sin, I think is how you say her name. And we switch between all 3 of them. And Lucy Holland did such a good job at giving them individual voices. They were really different people. They had their own voice, their own motivations. I really thought she did a great job with that. So Sin is the youngest, and she's kind of an observer throughout a lot of it. Riva is the middle child, and she has had a very bad accident and has been badly burned. But before that, she was kind of like the beautiful one. And then Cain is the oldest, and Cain is transmasculine in this time period. I thought Lucy Holland did such a good job describing what life would have been like in like ancient, basically, Britain for a person trapped in a body that didn't feel right. And not only a body, but also trapped in a role that didn't feel right. The ending of this book is so powerful, and it's so like legendary, if that makes sense. Like it felt like I was reading an old British or Welsh poem that you would read in like a Middle English class. Gorgeous book. I really recommend it. I gave it, I think, 4.75 stars. Yes, 4.75 stars. Beautiful read. And the cover, after you've read the book, the cover just will hit you in the heart so much harder. The next fantasy I read was Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. Okay, so this is kind of weird because when I started this book, I thought it was really slow, and I was a little bummed because I felt like it didn't capture the magic that Circe did. But I went into it sort of expecting that because while this book has been popular, Circe was much more popular. And I was like, okay, you don't have to love every mythology retelling as much as you loved Circe. But once you hit about the like 40% mark, this book gets really good. So the opening is just a little bit slow, but then once you get past the opening, it gets very, very good. We follow Ariadne, which if you're familiar with her from Greek mythology, she's most famous for 2 things. One, she gave Theseus a magic spool so he could slay the Minotaur. And 2, marrying Dionysus. This book opens with her as a child, and her mother has given birth to the Minotaur. And we follow her childhood, we follow her meeting Theseus, and then we follow her meeting Dionysus. This book, I feel like, is really about what life is like for women, especially in these ancient societies. How little control you have over your own destiny, how you get swept up in fate and there's nothing you can do about it. There were some really great lines in this book. Ariadne is not the only narrator. Her sister Phaedra is also a narrator, and I really like the juxtaposition of the two narrators. They end up leading different lives, but there's so many similarities in how their lives turn out. I give this 4.5 stars. If you like retellings, I would definitely pick this one up. I read one historical fiction this month, and it was my book of the month pick for January, and it was The Magnolia Palace by Fiona Davis. This is my first Fiona Davis, and I did enjoy it. So this is a historical novel, and it takes place during two different settings. The first setting is 1919, and we're following Lillian, who is somewhat of a famous artist's muse. An interesting facet to this book is that her mother died during the 1918 pandemic, which obviously, since we're living in the world we are living in, that was kind of a cool added token of history in there. Lillian gets sort of swept up in some business that she wasn't involved in, and she needs to hide, and she ends up working as a lady's maid in the Frick Mansion in New York City. I was not familiar with this place. I've never lived in New York. I've been there, but I don't know a ton about the history of New York. But apparently, there was a very wealthy man who left his house to the city to become a museum. So she is his daughter's lady's maid. His daughter's name was Helen, and Helen is a lot. She's very spoiled. She doesn't really understand that people that work for her, they're not her friends. They don't like her. We're also following Veronica, who's a model in the 1960s, and she's British, and she comes to do a photo shoot at the Frick Mansion, and she ends up getting stuck there and then sort of unraveling this mystery that has clues. There's like a little bit of like a scavenger hunt going on. I thought the historical settings, both of them, were very engaging, very well researched. The mystery was pretty good. It's not like a whodunit mystery. It's just kind of like when some books have sort of like a mysterious element running through. This was one. Most of all, I think that Fiona Davis had really well developed characters. So Lillian is very interesting. Her motives are very interesting. She doesn't seem 100% good or evil. Same with Veronica. They both have like morality, balances going on. I will say I was reading this book and my husband was sitting next to me, and at one point I said, "Oh my God, this woman is a monster," which will tell you what a visceral reaction I had to reading this book and hopefully entice you to read it. I gave it 4 stars for a solid historical fiction. So I read one romance this month. It was an arc, and it was Barbarian Alien by Ruby Dixon, which was book 2 in the Ice Planet Barbarians. On paper, I shouldn't have liked this book. It has a kidnapping trope, which I usually hate. It has enemies to lovers, which I usually hate. But I really liked this book. Our heroine is Liz, who, if you remember from the first book, she's like kind of sassy, and not everybody likes her because she's kind of like brash. And Rahush, who resonates with her. If you're familiar with the Ice Planet Barbarians, they get this like rumble in their chest that lets them know that that's the person they should be with. And he doesn't give her a chance to resonate back, kidnaps her and brings her to a cave, which once they get there, she realizes that she's resonating with him too, but she's pretty mad at him. So a lot of the story is about them moving from enemies to like hate lovers to actual lovers. I have to say, I understand why these books are so popular, because when you're reading them, they are hard to put down and they're kind of silly, but they're still so much fun. So I give this 4.5 stars. Like, I'm not going to reread it, but I did have a hard time putting it down when I was reading it. I read 2 nonfiction books this month, and they're very specific to like who I am as a person. And I don't know if anyone else will read them, but I thought I'd give you like a really short bit about them. I read Grow More Food by Colin McCrate. I got an arc for it. I am a food gardener. I grow quite a bit of food every year in my yard, and I've wanted to up my produce and get a little more. Every year I like to get a little more, eat more of what we grow. So I got this book, and it was fantastic. I give it 5 stars. I took like 20 pages of notes in a notebook while I was reading it, because it's an arc. It will disappear. I won't have it. So I'd have a lot of stuff to remember for the spring and fall. And yeah, if you are starting a garden in your yard or are interested in it, this really lays out how you should plant. It solved the issue of why I have had terrible tomato growth the last 2 years, which when I read that, I was like, oh my God, that's the reason. Because the first year I grew tomatoes, I got 1,000. And then last year I got like 12. Oh, how upsetting. But now I think I know how to fix it, which was very exciting. And then the second nonfiction I read is The Mediterranean Table. And I don't know if this has an author. It is a cookbook, and as you can see, I marked all the recipes I want to try. My brother gave it to me for Christmas. I got it because I'm very interested in learning how to cook Mediterranean food better. Greek, Spanish, Italian. There's some Persian in here as well, and some Moroccan. So I got a lot of good recipes to try in 2022. Very excited. So I had 2 books I did not finish, and if you watched my January TBR, you might be like, oh, one of her most anticipated books was not on her wrap-up, and that was Winter Garden by Kristin Hannah. This book was beautifully written, and I got about 100 pages in, but it was too sad for me to read right now because of some stuff going on in my personal life, so I really couldn't read it. And it actually felt very freeing for me to decide that this is not the time for me to read this book, to put it down and to move on. And I don't think I'll never read this book. I think that maybe in a few years I'll feel like I can read this book. And I left my bookmark in, and I'm not going to take it out. And I really wanted to read a Kristin Hannah. I'm okay with sad books. I just think the specific subject matter in this was too sad for me at this time. And the last book I started but did not finish is Shady Hollow by Juneau Black. I have an arc of this, and so I am going to try to finish this, but honestly, this book just really isn't for me. I do think if I can get to like the 60% mark, I feel confident that I can review it without finishing it. I said in my January TBR that this book was either going to be like a whimsical blast or kind of ridiculous, and for me personally, it's leaning toward kind of ridiculous. So it's about a town completely populated by animals, and one of the animals gets murdered and one of the other animals has to like solve it. I think I'm at about like the 30% mark, but a good marker for me that I'm not enjoying a book is the only time I've picked this up is when my insomnia has gotten really bad and I've been awake at like 2 a.m. and I'm trying to read something to make me fall asleep. So that's usually a mark of a book that I'm not enjoying. I do have to read a little bit more of that book so I can review it, but honestly, I can't say that I'm gonna completely finish it. So those are my January reads. I hope you saw something you like. I hope you read a wonderful selection of books in January and that you're getting excited for your February reads. I have my February TBR out already. I'll put a link in the description for it. And I'm about to get real cozy and read for a few minutes before I have to get my kids from school. I hope you are in the middle of a good book, about to start reading a good book, or about to start writing a great book. See you soon.